Well, in a rare change of events, the weather outside is actually pretty nice. Sadly, I went and casually dislocated my finger yesterday, so no riding for me. Well, I think I know what I'm doing today. Let's dive straight in and see what the cat's boxed up. Well, timber me shivers, it's an early 2000s Rocket FAB Pro Trials. Rocket was a Canadian brand that made a couple of fab models, with this being their trials version. The other model was an alloy dirt jump frame, which was really popular in the UK, despite not having the strongest reputation. So, I guess to make sure these trials versions were stronger, they not only made them out of steel, they also added a huge head tube gusset. Although, in an ironic twist, this gusset, which is meant to add strength, was actually the death of many frames. Any engineers spot the issue? Well, from my limited understanding, welding a gusset in the middle of tubes like this creates a stress riser at the end of the weld. It's heavier, but ideally you'd add one on either side where the tube can spread the stress better. Sadly, many of these cool frames cracked either at the end of the weld or at the sharp points of the Rocket cutout. These extra gussets are a good example of what I mean. Not quite a gusset, but a built-in booster helps stiffen up the rear. Unlike the prototype steel Onza's huge dropouts, this Rocket has small, neat Ritchie versions. And to go with the V-brake mounts, it also has a disc mount and stylish tubed brace. Being a retro frame long before anyone had ever heard of tapers, it has a simple bit of pipe for a 1 1/8 headset. Same goes for the lowest form of bracket, just a simple BSA threaded bit of steel. I guess some things never go out of fashion. This frame is also from before the time of yokes. This style isn't usually the strongest, but with it being steel, that's not my main concern. I'm more worried about the chainstays being a mile long. I'll find out exactly how long later. Fortunately, the tyre clearance does seem a little better than the last bike I built. Also, despite some tatty paint, the condition isn't too bad, with no dents on the chainstays or down tube. Either the tube walls are so thick it doesn't dent, or it's been well looked after, ish. Though, judging by the weight, I suspect the tubing is on the thicker side. Oof, yeah, the frame is indeed chonky, but it's been a while since I've had a steel frame, so maybe this is average? It's still a chunk lighter than the Straptor, so that's a bonus. I placed a cryptic clue on this build on my Instagram recently, and one person managed to guess the frame. Steve Sturt. He also told me that the frame may or may not have been made by De Kerf, who's a legend in the bike building world. And apparently the name FAB stands for about bike. I can't find any info to confirm these things though, so take them with a pinch of garlic salt. Despite being a trials frame, I am suspicious of its trials qualities. It struggles with my balance test. This may suggest it will be hard work on the rear wheel. Well, I guess I'll find out how good or bad it rides after I've built it. So, let's get started. Place your bets on where I'll start first. If you said the seat clamp, then give yourself a round of applause. CT hasn't exerted too much effort here. Looks like a bog standard no-name model. But I'll give him some credit for getting a well-designed one. I do like a cylindrical bolt in my clamps. At the risk of being predictable, a seat post is an obvious next step, with this one being made by Brave Machine and is a BMX post. The head design is cool, but like the frame, it's on the heavy side. These nuts and bolts are seriously overkill. CT must really want my saddle clamped tightly. Saddle time, and finally something a little lighter. A Selle l'Italia SLR. These were the F1 of trial saddles back in the day. At only 135 grams, it was light, but it was also low profile, saving some space. Only downside is that they're a little on the sharp side. Let's fit the turny bits. This turny bit is a retro WTB grease guard model. This is quite a bit different from modern headsets. It uses open bearings which you can keep lubed with a grease port. First impressions are, it's a little messy, but sometimes the best things in life are the messiest. This thing just eats up headsets. Sleep well, little one. Wait, did I say it eats headsets? I think it's the other way round. Now the bearing race is full of headset tool guts. Lovely. Crisis averted. As tempting as it is to go in dry, I'm going to add plenty of grease to make things nice and smooth. The bearings go in next, though it would help if I put them the right way up. That's better. I then repeat with the bottom cup. Right, fork inspection time, and it appears the cute thief only got me a knife. Where's the rest of it? Even with only half of it here, I'm liking what I see. And what I see is a Pace CNC'd crown. Pace was such a cool suspension and frame brand from the UK in the 90s and early 2000s. Their suspension forks used this neat crown, but they also did a rigid fork that used it too. This one has an alloy steerer, which isn't looking its nicest, but it is quite thick, so I'm hoping it will still be strong enough. Well, it looks like he's a fan of these crowns. There was a spare in the box. I mean, they are cool, so thanks, CT. I also have this carbon pace fork from a build a while ago where I chose to keep my teeth instead, but I wanted to show you something cool. And that's the fact that the pace crown takes 1 1/8 tubes. I heard you like forks, so here's a fork on your fork. So yeah, if you wanted to make your own rigid fork from a Pace fork crown, you just need some long steerer tubes and dropouts, and a welder, plus a helmet, some filler, a welding table, a jig, maybe a fume extractor, maybe some flux, and some skills to do it. Easy. But right now, I need a crown race. A wild crown race appears. Annoyingly, it doesn't have a split design and is a literal bearing race, so can't be cut through with any tools I have, with it being hardened steel. Probably for the best, as the bearings would hate that. Even though I have a decent tool selection, one thing I don't have is a dedicated crown race fitter. But I do have a big screwdriver. Or at least that's what I've been told. I use this to tap the crown race on, being careful to avoid the area the bearings contact. Being totally legless actually made that a lot easier. And yeah, it is fully seated. The steerer has an insert that makes the race sit a little higher than the crown. Right, well, I may as well fit it, but I mustn't forget the orange seal first. Pretty cool, huh? I need to give it some space though. Some pinned space, says. Nipping to the good old US of A for the stem. This Thompson model is actually for road bikes. The angle of the dangle is great for trials, but the teeny wimpy bolts are a bit concerning. Hopefully, if they can hold a drop bar in place, they can hold a riser one too. Then a matching WTB cap should top things off WTB-ly. And with that fitted, we're nearly done. But a rear wheel might help. Here's one Blue Peter made earlier. A Hope Pro 2 single speed is a classic trials hub, strong, reliable, and easy to find spares. But being an older model, it does lack some engagement points. And this particular one is lacking the disc side axle cap. Now, what was I saying about finding spares? I couldn't find a replacement no matter where I looked. Behind the sofa, in the washing machine, under the cat, none of the usual places. So, I'm left with only one choice. I'll have to make my own. I'm going to use this blurry bit of pipe and washer to fabricate the finest end cap you've ever seen. First, I measure once, mark once, and cut once. After sanding twice, I clean twice to get both surfaces prepped. And then I glue once. And finally, I check once. And just like everything I do, 60% of the time, it works every time. Well, I assume so anyway. Before I find out, let's discover the rim. This is a Tioga factory downhill rim. At 35mm wide, it's a decent width for trials, and doesn't weigh too much either. But one annoying feature is a lip on the top of the sidewall. This can make it tricky to fit some brake pads. I actually used to grind this off when I used this rim years ago, but I'd rather not spoil this rim as they are a bit rarer these days. Wrapping the rim tightly will be this Schwalbe Schmart Schmamm tyre. Little known fact, the band, the White Stripes, were actually named after this tyre and rim combo. And it is a cool combo. The tyre should also be fast rolling, but with some bite if I want to take it off-road too. After a smooth tyre fitting, let's do a pointy fitting of a sprocket. Unlike last time, these single-speed spacers are nice and neat. An 18-tooth sprocket is quite fancy too. It's a CNC'd alloy one with a nice fat bottom. And then an alloy lock ring rings it off lockly. And now I get to see if my homemade axle end cap actually works. It does! I'm sure those of you with access to a lathe are scoffing at my ugly duckling of an end cap, but I'm actually very proud of my creation. Seeing the frame with the wheel in it has made me bike curious though. How long are these chainstays? The Straptor had super long 410mm ones, and this has even longer ones, a whole 5mm with 415mm chainstays. The Straptor surprised me with not being terrible on the rear wheel, so maybe this will be the same? I'm not holding my breath though. Right, nearly done. Let's see if I can do something with the front end next. Good news everybody! I finally found my legs. These are the missing pieces of the rare Trials version. They have steel legs with bonded alloy dropouts and are surprisingly light. Despite the frame and fork being Trials specific, they both feature V-brake mounts rather than dedicated Magura versions. But as a V-brake fan, I'm hoping I can make full use of these. I'll get them roughly straight for now, and when I fit the wheel, that should line it up nicely. This is such a cool fork though, and is a great match for the frame. CT did really well finding it, as they are pretty rare these days. Right, speaking of wheels, here's a front one. This has a super nice Chris King Classic hub. For a retro bike, it doesn't really get much better than this. This has been built radially, and someone must have watched my lacing tutorial, as it even has the spokes elbows out, just how I like them. I'm also pleased to see a matching Tioga rim, only this one is the narrower XC version. It's pretty skinny, but still builds into a strong wheel. But like the rear rim, it's giving me lip. I don't think these were advertised for rim brake use, so hopefully it doesn't get in the way of my pads. It balances better than the Crossmax did in my last video, so it should be a decent choice for trials. Rubberizing up front is a slightly older Schwalbe model, a black Jack. I don't see why they need to know the colour of Jack's skin, but this is an older model and things were different back then. But that side is very similar to the Schmarr Schmamm, and importantly, it has the matching white stripes. Rather than an all-steel quick release, this time we have an all-XTR model instead. And with the wheel in and tight, that should have aligned the legs, so now I can pinch them up. Looking cool. Also, we're nearly done now. Alright, I'll do it better. Well, the tempo needs some work, but this bar sounds good enough to fit to me. If, like me, you're wondering what it is, it's an on-one bar of some sort. As well as sounding okay, it also has a decent figure, which is nice. Only possible issue is that they're a little on the narrow side. Very interesting fact for you, I swapped the 2.5mm Allen key bolts to a pair of 4mm ones for extra clampness. Are we finished yet? Almost, just around the next bracket. And this arse bracket is particularly cool. An SKF BXC 300. Sounds like a video game weapon, doesn't it? SKF are leg ends in the bearing industry. I used to make really fancy brackets like these. Often arse brackets wouldn't last long because there wasn't much space inside for big bearings. SKF came along and wanted to end the reliability issues and put some seriously high quality bearings into their models. The downside was that it did add quite a bit of weight. But it wasn't just the bearings that are good quality. Even the threads are great. But it does lose points for using a tool that I hate. These can slip out and damage the tabs quite easily, so you gotta be really careful. I'm getting a little bit cranky now. I'm sorry. A set of Race-Base Prodigy XE cranks please me. These are super strong and should be a fit and forget item. The best type of item. Shame these are a little dirty though. There's absolutely nothing I can do about that, sadly. The 4-bolt spacing is also less than ideal. Don't get me wrong, this inspired bash is a perfect fit and does look cool, but once I add the chainring, you can see that 4-bolt spacing forces use of a much bigger bash than needed. Older 5-bolt spacing was more compact and offered better ground clearance as a result. I'm probably overthinking it though. Does 10mm reduced ground clearance really matter on a bike like this? Does anything matter? Why are we even here? What's the meaning of life anyway? Well, as we all know, the answer is 42. But I wonder what the question was. Ah yes, ground clearance. I'm not entering any UCI comps on this bike, so does ground clearance matter? 97. Actually, you know what? A bigger bash looks good on longer chainstays. It fills the gap between the tyre and bash. I take back everything I just said. And now we're nearly done. But it does need a chain. An old fave, the KMC K610 model, is a pleasant find. This model has minimal stretch and I rarely snap them. And what do you know? It's the perfect length too. This rarely happens. But the chain is a bit of a slacker, so it needs a manager to keep it working properly. This manager is a cheap tanky model. It seems finding older qualified managers is pretty hard these days. This is similar to my favourite Tratec model, but needs slight modification before I can fit it. Starting with the cage, let's remove this outer one to make fitting it easier. With it removed, I can now fit or remove the manager from the bike without needing to break the chain. Very handy. The other thing I'll do is remove this pin so I can have the arms sit closer to the frame. A set of mole grips does the job nicely. One negative point with this tensioner is that the arm is a little short, and with an 18-tooth sprocket, I can't set the tensioner close to the frame without the jockey wheel hitting the sprocket, so I'll have to run it angled down slightly. It will still work fine, but it just won't look as nice. But at least it's easy to get a strong tension. I do it by using a screwdriver to lever back the spring while I tighten the clamp bolt. We've made it go, now to make it stop. Most of my retro bikes have had Magura hydraulic rim brakes, but personally, I'm more of a V-brake fan. They're more powerful and have adjustable spring tension, so you can get them set up with a much liver lever action too. This Dior model isn't very fancy, but they're slim, so are a great choice when using a wider rim. And because this frame has V-brake mounts, fitting them is easier than me after 2 shots of tequila. As for the pads, looks like I'm going with these Clarkson models. I think this is the first V-brake specs bike where I'm not making my own pads. But are they any good? My scientific tests suggest they will be. They're also slim enough to fit under the rim's lips. Ideal. More V-brakes sit up front. A set of Avid single-digit 7s this time. The slightly fatter arms should help the pads reach the narrower rim. As for the levers, CT has supplied these Shimano Dior models. Slightly annoyed he hasn't found a pair of my favourite Avid SD7 levers, but he's too cute to stay annoyed at. I'm sure these will work just fine. Right, cable time. Rather than using actual brake outer, CT has provided my preferred oversized gear cable. The advantage is that it doesn't compress anywhere near as much as a brake outer, making the brakes feel much stiffer. And my top tip for getting a smoother feel is to give it a quick blast of GT85. Even with this tight bend, the cable slides through easily. Fitting the cable is a bit of an involved process, but I still prefer this over bleeding a brake. But once set up, just like me, it feels great and has plenty of bite. But it's also a little backwards. I connected to the wrong lever. Fortunately, swapping is super easy. Another win for V-brakes. I then fit the front cable, and that feels great too. Now I have put my grubby fingers all over the rims, so I give them a quick blast of disc brake cleaner to get them working even better. And with that, we're nearly done. But I do need some pedals. These are some retro cage gusset models. I actually used these back in the day. I don't remember them being too bad. They're certainly not lightweight, and the sealing is questionable. They are quite possibly bent too, and I felt grippier pedals, but I don't know, rose tinted glasses makes me like them. Okay, we are actually nearly done. Got the grips to fit, but I'm a bit curious about the bar width. And at about 690mm, that is a lot narrower than I would like. I put in my complaints to CT, and he came up with a solution. A pair of bar extenders. By tightening the inner bolt, it expands the inserts and clamps the inside of the bar. Seems sketchy, but they are in there very tightly. Plus, they are longer than they need to be. I'll cut them down to 640mm like inspired bars, and that'll put less force onto the inserts too. These ODI Aaron Gwyn lock-on grips will also help take some stress away from the extenders. These grips are a fine choice for trials as they're nice and thin. Maybe not as grippy as a mushroom style when wet, but they are great in the dry. And with those fitted, we are done. Looks cool, but you know the drill. I've got to get things straight and tight, then give it a test ride. My sore finger will just have to cope. So, right off the bat, the pedals are bent. But that won't stop me from pulling a well-sick manual. But the back brake is super grabby, so I'll have to avoid touching it, making manuals a bit trickier. Oddly, going backwards is actually easier, as I can use my pedal pressure instead of the brake. Not gonna lie, this bike is a pig on the back wheel. The long chainstays combined with a super short reach make it a strain on the body. Possibly the worst trial-specific bike on the rear wheel I've ever felt. Front pivots are decent though. And the short reach does make it the best bike I've ever felt for rear wheel pivots. Short bikes do front hop well though, and the slight flex in the forks helps too. Zero issues from the brake so far. But they are a bit loud. I won't be able to ride down any hills on this thing. It may look like I'm getting on okay, but I can really feel my back straining when on the rear wheel. So, what do you think? Personally, I think it looks really nice. I like the look of larger frames, and the smaller tubes and pace fork looks awesome too. But, and this is a big but, it rides horribly. So bad in fact that I'm actually not sure if I'll put out a riding video. I can just see my back giving out. I wonder if the weight is making it harder too. The frame is heavy, but it's still lighter than the Straptor. Is the full bike much lighter? Well, I didn't expect that. It's 100 grams heavier than it. The weight combined with the long chainstays and short reach is not a good combo. Even if I'm in no hurry to ride it, I've really enjoyed building it, and it is a cool bit of Trials history. Did any of you have one? If so, what did you think of it? Frame aside, CT did well on the parts. This is a lovely saddle and post cooker combo. And the pace fork is an absolute treat. I've never had one of these before, and it has to be the coolest fork ever made. The Tioga wheels are cool too, and I love the matching Schwalbe tyres. A retro tensioner would have been nice, but this works, so I can't complain too much. And yeah, sorry about my crisis when fitting the bash. In the end, it suits the bike perfectly. The size of this headset made me a little unsure if it would look good, but I needn't have worried. It looks great, and I think this is probably the perfect bike for it to go on. Also, the gusset hasn't cracked yet, so that's a bonus too. The V-brakes are proving to be really powerful too. These pads work great. Shame they're so noisy though. That really would make me self-conscious when riding near people or down a hill. It's not all good though. The pedals have okay grip, but they feel wonky. Could be bent axles, but it also could be bent cranks. I don't think it's the cranks though. All of this chat is fine, but it all comes down to what CT thinks of the final build. Well, with that deep insight, I'm gonna call it a day. I really hope you enjoyed this build. Let me know in the comments and with a thumbs up and share. Videos are also released early on my Patreon too, and that support really helps CT get some of these parts. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.